It's my pleasure today to welcome you to what promises to be a very interesting talk by Dr. Mario Poceski at the University of Florida, where he is a professor of Buddhist studies and Chinese religions. Dr. Poceski has organized a symposium this weekend on early Chinese contemplative practices and ritual, marking the very first professional meeting to be held at the Elling Eide Center since shutting down for COVID in spring 2020. So we're very happy to be back and hosting once again research in Southwest Florida. We are delighted to have him here. Dr. Poceski received his PhD in East Asian languages and cultures from UCLA with a specialization in Buddhist studies. He is the author of 5 books, an editor of 2 edited volumes, and an author of dozens of articles on early Chinese religion, Chan Buddhism, contemplative practices, Buddhism on the internet, mindfulness and cultural appropriation, just to name a few of the topics that have captured his interest over the years. His courses at the University of Florida include Introduction to Buddhism, Chinese Religions, Religious Studies and Methodology, Buddhist Meditation, Buddhism in Film, and a variety of different topic seminars too numerous to mention. He has spent extended periods abroad for research in Japan, Taiwan, China, and Germany, and has received several prestigious fellowships for his work, including fellowships from Alexander von Humboldt and Fulbright Hays. He also likes to travel for pleasure, and from what I've told by friends who are on Facebook, you post really lovely images of your travels, hikes, and excursions as well. We're very happy to have Dr. Poceski here to give this, what promises to be a very interesting talk, Religions, Divine Blueprints of Reality, Vedic Superstitions for Paths to Self-Transcendence. So please help me giving a warm welcome for Dr.
Thank you very much. Thank you for coming. Thank you for the lovely introduction, and above all, thank you for the Eide Center for making this wonderful facility available and also organizing these wonderful events. For me also, with the COVID, I haven't been doing too much. Last week, or the week before, we had a couple of conferences at the University of Florida, but other than that, in terms of public lecture and so, there have been not too much. And I hope you don't mind me speaking without mask. Is difficult to speak with a mask. Probably it will be difficult to understand. So I've been living now in Florida for over 20 years. So I guess I was not born here, but I guess I can count myself as Floridian of a sort. I mean, I've been around here more than most of my students, at least the undergraduate ones. So, and it's kind of, I mean, when people look at Florida, we don't think of at least the kind of stereotypical images as of a place of not, I mean, nice beaches and so on, but not a place of high culture, very intense, high level thinking and so on. And it's wonderful that we have institutions like this that prove that that's not the case, that really we have wonderful culture, wonderful facilities, a wonderful quest for knowledge, for understanding, and so on, that we can also share for people, of course, throughout the country and throughout the world. So, so before I go into my topic, just a couple of caveats. Since this is more of a public lecture, I wanted to come up with something a little bit broader. So this is not a major area. I'm not engaged in theory of religion. I mean, I've taught some of it. So, but I wanted to kind of make us think about some of these broader themes. And of course, religion is a very important, pervasive phenomenon in our society, in our lives, whether we are aware of that or not. So this is kind of a general talk about thinking about religion and looking at different ways and maybe trying to understand what exactly we are talking about, kind of to try to order some of this. And also another caveat is, I will be showing some illustrations, and there will be different, I mean, images associated with different traditions or ideas and so on. But my main point is not really to highlight some of the good points or bad points of particular religious tradition. I mean, of course, I have to illustrate something concrete, but really to think about these larger patterns of religious belief, religious expression, interaction, the place of religion, society, and so on. This should be working.
Just click the mouse.
Click the mouse might be easier. Okay. So let me start with three stories, kind of vignettes. The first one, in our modern imagination, we are familiar with the image of the suicide bomber, right? I mean, there are many examples of that. And actually, this kind of falls into this larger pattern of, you can say, spiritual suicide. You find across religious tradition, through history and so on. Sometimes it's self-immolation or killing yourself and so on. Now, behind all this, I mean, the perception of suicide bombers in modern contexts are divided. I mean, in our culture, most of us kind of find it difficult to understand, you know, how can you do such a thing? It looks horrific, it looks violent, and so on. In other cultures, for a variety of reasons, not just religious reasons, these people are celebrated as martyrs, as heroes, and so on. Without going into the political undertones, the point is that we have basically this kind of behavior, and it's a complicated behavior. It's interrelated with particular stories, life stories. I mean, these are individuals who make these kind of choices. Most of them are young men in contemporary context. Some of them, like this is a woman. Actually, this is a woman with children, mother, who decides to kill herself and, of course, kill other people for a particular cause. So there are many, of course, there's a political angle, there's personal angle. Maybe in some of these cases might be issues with, I don't know, mental sickness or depression or whatever. Some of it can be, but often, at least in the contemporary context, there is something else that really makes people go to this extreme, or at least most of us will agree it's this extreme form of behavior. It's a religious belief, right? This kind of, this goes against history, that there is some kind of reward. You do this because maybe you do it for political reasons, maybe personal reasons, in some of these organizations and so on, but you do it because you really expect some kind of rewards in the afterlife, right? So this is important. So this kind of religious martyrdom is a way of basically securing a good afterlife. There are stories like you are reborn in the paradise in front of the Lord with 72 virgins and so on. You have heard some of it. So this is kind of one way of thinking. This is a particular form of behavior that maybe for us is foreign, but it's part of, you can say, our global culture, right? Let me show you the second vignette. It's a story of the woman on the left, born in Brooklyn. And she was born in a very traditional religious community. And when she came at the age of 18, and I'm telling the story because this was all over the news. It had been written, there's some videos, so I'm not revealing some personal information. This is very public. So at 18, she was, her family married her. This was custom within their religious tradition. They're very strict, observant part of this community. And so she's married to this young man. She doesn't know, and she's told, you know, this is your duty in life, to be married. And of course, this is your highest calling. And then to have children, to, you know, to secure the next generation. So she's married, and then within 6 years, she finds herself with 7 children. And again, she's 18. I don't know if you remember when you're 18 or you have children or grandchildren at 18, but I can see my students, you're pretty clueless at that time. And even more so if you grow in a very traditional sheltered community where issues of intimacy, of sex, of relationship are not really discussed. And as this goes, she's absolutely depressed. She finds she cannot communicate with her husband. Actually, her husband, from her account, is very abusive towards her. And so she, at some point, she reaches a breaking point. She cannot stay in this kind of life anymore. So she decides to leave, and she takes her children and runs away. And of course, as you can imagine, the husband is not very happy with that. His family, the people around us. So then they have a legal battle. She tries to divorce the husband. And you will say, well, okay, she was abused woman, sympathetic and so on. But really, there's the other part of the story, and there are all kinds of legal loopholes and perspectives. But the community, all the community, including her family, absolutely denounce her. Like she's doing something that is absolutely unthinkable. So she's like evil person, and they absolutely have to make sure that she doesn't get custody. So there's this legal battle, and the community, which maybe not rich, but it's still a larger community, they have resources, they hire very expensive lawyers she doesn't have anything. She has not gone to school. She has some NGOs help, some legal advice or something like that. And she loses custody. She cannot see her children. And not only that, but her family is completely, absolutely don't want to talk with her. Relatives, her friends, everybody disavow. Now, from the perspective of the community, they're saving the children because really by kind of maintaining, kind of taking away from, she's leaving the religion, and by leaving the religion, she basically cuts this religious way of life, religious way of upbringing, and the hope for heavenly reward, right? And this is one story, but there are other. This is another woman, similar kind of stories. There are a number of stories like that. Okay, so this is it. Let's go to the third vignette. It's a mountain somewhere, and it's a monk, a bunch of monks actually, maybe, or maybe a single monk going for a pilgrimage. And then at some point, shall I go back and forth to see if we can?
Yes, there's
Please.
Okay. And so this monk is going there and then sits down and meditates. And what is he meditating? Well, he's kind of young and he's been thinking about maybe reading some philosophy, a little bit Nietzsche, Spinoza as a teenager, not interested maybe in kind of ordinary way of life, maybe study some Buddhist philosophy. They're still young, maybe who knows how much he understands really about, all these final points. But he's kind of thinking, maybe he's contemplating some passages. We have this famous passage from Dogen, the famous 13th century Zen master. So to study the Buddha's ways, to study oneself is to forget oneself. What does this mean? To forget oneself is to be enlightened by the mere things, basically to be enlightened by everything of the universe. So this prospect of enlightenment again. When enlightened by the mere things, your body and mind, as well as the bodies and minds of others, drop away or disappear, right? There's no trace of awakening remains. This trace of awakening spirit, right? What is this? So this is kind of like a riddle, but it's a kind of spiritual quest, maybe quest for enlightenment, quest for peace, contemplative life, maybe with some success, maybe with lack of success, and so on. All right. So, so these are kind of three short stories, and maybe three impressions, kind of a vignette I want to introduce. What's the common thread? What's the common thread between the suicide bomber, the mother who is losing the custody of her children, and he's ostracized by her community, and he's finding herself alone, and the young person, the young monk meditating somewhere in the forest? Well, I would suggest one common trait is that we will all put these things in some one way or another in the category of religion, right? We will say, I kind of indicated, but even if I didn't kind of highlight some of the religious underpinnings of these stories or these patterns of behavior, you will, you will say, okay, this is something to do with religion. But what are suicide bombers and meditating monks and grieving mothers having to do with each other? Well, we will say this is this is all about religion, but then what is religion? What is it that connects this? So what's the religion as a category? And this is a big theme actually in religious studies, and I don't want to, I don't have time, and this is not the point, maybe I will highlight, but the basic religion as a category is something that we use very loosely. We are not really quite sure what exactly do we mean by religion. When we use the term, it's all over the place. And it's kind of, and not just in everyday usage, but also in scholarly communication. So, I actually don't have a religious studies background. I've never taken a course in religion in my life. My university didn't have the UC systems, University of California, they don't have religion department. So, I did Buddhist studies, so I was there, but really I didn't take formal study of religion now. So when I have my students come to me, even the first class, I tell them, you have taken more religious courses than I have taken. But in a sense of, this is naming convention. I'm a religion department now professor there, so my courses are religion something. And of course, my courses on Buddhism at UCLA were Chinese studies something, because just different nomenclature. So I'm going to maybe highlight some of the details, but keep this in mind. It's difficult to pinpoint what religion is, or having a lack of clarity of precision. But whatever it is, if there is such a thing as religion, also it's not something you can isolate. It's always interacts with economy, it interacts with society, it interacts with politics, and the boundaries between what's religion, what's politics, what's economic activity, what's ideology, and so on, are not very clear. They're often blurred. Now, if you look at the scholarly literature of the subject, various scholars over the centuries have given many different versions of what your religion is, many different definitions. The first one is perhaps the most common one, at least in our society. So when you talk about religion, it's something to do with God, right? It's about belief in God. So are you religious? Are you a believer, right? I mean, that's what kind of how we think in terms of everyday usage. Already about 100 years ago, when religion started to develop, people realized that this is a little bit restrictive because there are many societies that don't believe in God, at least not in the kind of monotheistic God. You know, people with Jewish or Christian tradition might be familiar. So then Taylor, proper British gentleman, kind of one of the early pioneer figures, says, well, it's a belief in spiritual beings. So it's not kind of, you don't prioritize just God, but maybe people in tribal society have different deities and so on, but it's something to do with spiritual beings. It's still about belief, which is still very Christian, right? Thinking about religion, right? Then we have others, and then Otto, a German scholar, says, spiritual being a little bit still kind of too restricted. So how about holy? How about religion is something about the experience of the holy, right? We have sociological definition. The great French sociologist, this is perhaps one of the most influential theories of religion. It's basically, he focuses on the social functions of a religion. So it's not so much religion, it's not so much about the content of beliefs, but how those beliefs function in terms of creating certain identity and creating a society that can function. So basically, it's a unified system of beliefs and practices related to sacred texts. This could be a variety of things. We are all separate individuals, but we have common framework of belief. We are combined. So this is very important. Actually, for him, religion is society. So from his perspective, human beings have innate need for religion. Might not be the religion we kind of understand it, might be something in the future different, but this kind of common framework of belief that unites us and facilitates a sense of community, right? And then kind of we have some offbeat, like individual tasks in solitariness. Okay, maybe, but obviously much of religion is very social. People go to church, interact. And then, of course, you have famous critiques of religion. Marx, Opium of the Masses, right? This is kind of a tool of the capitalist elites, or before the feudal elites, or whatever, the privilege to control the masses by promising them this belief in afterlife, what some sociologists of religion call delayed compensator. So your life is miserable, but don't make much trouble. Just work long hours for low pay. Don't try to stir the system. No rebellion, something that's all bad. But it might be not very good life, miserable. Maybe if you're coal miner, you'll die young. But if you do the right thing, the Lord is waiting for you in the afterlife. And then, of course, the famous one by Freud is basically religion as a kind of, it's got this complicated theory. He calls it an illusion, or this kind of almost compares religion to neurosis. It kind of goes back to the origins. I mean, he had this kind of a little bit fanciful stories about how religion developed, but it was basically this kind of neurotic fixation for a fatherly figure, the need to kind of play out all these insecurities and so on. So basically, going back to my experience when it came to religious studies, was like, my Lord, these people don't know what they're doing, because they cannot even agree exactly what is it exactly they are studying, right? There's no real definition of religion that all scholars can agree on. Now, the beautiful thing about not having a very strict definitions or very strict disciplinary methodological strictures, then you have lots of freedom. Then you can do all kinds of things. You can explore about society, about culture, about art, and as long as there's something religious, it's a fair game. So in that sense, it works pretty well. So before I continue here, let me give some basic assumption that will kind of underline everything I said, and even more so that I am going to say. Basically, fundamentally, at least from the way, okay, let me go back and forth just to make sure the picture comes. Yeah. The basic assumption I'm coming from here, and I want you, even if you're a religious believer, to take it, at least for this purpose of understanding it, that all religious beliefs and practices are human construct. It's us human beings creating stories, creating beliefs, creating narratives, organizing communities, and so on. Now, to say that religion is a human construct doesn't necessarily means that there is no God or gods, if you want, polytheistic or something like that. But regardless, even if there is a God, like, I don't know, some more kind of more theoretically sophisticated monotheism, it's what we call religion, the texts we have, they're human construct, the rituals we have, they're human construct. Maybe they're inspired by belief in God, if there is such a thing, but ultimately all we have are us human beings trying to make sense of the universe, or kind of responding to certain needs and responses. So within this theoretical model, basically all we call religion is human construct. This doesn't postulate the existence or non-existence of God, whether nirvana is real or not. It's not my business to tell people about that. And also, religions develop in the course of human history. I mean, they have been there from the dawn of civilization because they fulfill certain needs. I mean, if you are sociologists of religion, you can say there are certain social needs, or are for sense of community, for organizing society in a particular way, for subjugating a sense of selfishness and egoistic impulses to a larger common good, which is important for human survival, and so on. There are also aspirations, human aspirations to be more, to better ourselves, to cultivate ourselves, to go beyond our self-imposed limitations, and so on. And also religion change, they are not static. I mean, we have this kind of by religious leaders that, you know, the religion is about some kind of unchanging essence and so on. I mean, again, there might be some kind of essence out there, but the expressions of religion that we create, we communicate, we participate in, or we criticize if we don't like religion, they all shaped by all kinds of historical exigencies. I mean, when Buddha was born, he was born in an Indian society, so he spoke certain language. If you look at the terminology of religion, or what we call Hinduism today, right? So he believed, I mean, there was something new, but he believed, he absorbed many of the elements of belief in karma, reincarnation. If you look at the figure of Jesus, I mean, you cannot understand Jesus. I mean, the story of Jesus and the history and the creation of the gospel is a fascinating story. It's a very complicated one, but you cannot understand his emergence without understanding the context of Middle Eastern society and culture and religion, especially Judaism, but of course also the Roman Empire and so on. And the notion of Messiah, it was not something that was invented by Jesus, it was there, it was part of the culture. The notion of God, of course, Judaism had been around, and so on. So there are many, many elements like that. So religion is dynamic, is changing, is response to human needs and historical exigency. They're interconnected. You can never isolate something like say, this is religion. Whenever, this is religion, yeah, but there's money around involved. This culture, calligraphy, art, this ritual, and people maybe go for religious reasons, but sometimes people go to church ritual because, well, after that there might be a basketball club, or young people maybe can meet some nice girls or boys and they can hook up. I mean, people go for a variety of reasons, so it's never as simple as that. So to make sense and kind of organize, so kind of how do we organize all these different things? I'd like to talk about three modes of being religious, three ways of thinking about a religion. So the first one is blueprint. A religion is defined blueprint of reality, right? The second one is criticism of religion as dated superstition, something that human beings maybe needed at some primitive stages of development, and it's time now with rationality, with science, and so to let go. And the third one is the path to self-transcendence, or path to self-cultivation, right? Spiritual practice and those kind of things. By the way, this is a wonderful, I like this motif of Madonna and the Child. This is by Fra Angelico, which is just absolutely fascinating. Actually, if you go to Firenze, there's this monastery, San Marco, and Fra Angelico was decorating the cells of the monks. So you go to the cells of individual monks and you have paintings. Can you imagine? I mean, you go in each room, you go to the cells are small and miserable, kind of monastic cells, but this, and of course, you have also larger paintings, just amazing. Anyway, so religion is defined revelation. This is the most common kind of understanding we have of religion in our society, in part because we are influenced by the existing religion that have changed in terms of demographics, in terms of culture, where people coming from, and what kind of religious belief. But still, you can say Christianity. Maybe also there's lots of Judaism in Florida, especially, and so on. So this is the kind of it presupposes, I guess, if you have revelation, it's a revelation of coming from somewhere. Usually it's God, right? So this is you have so God, the creator, the arbiter of good and bad. You can say the father of all beings, and so on. So he has the divine authority. He can abjugate faith, perhaps, according to some systems of beliefs, and so on. And sometimes maybe also God manifests himself to humanity, and according to Christian mythology, he manifests himself as his son, which mysteriously was also actually himself. So this kind of son and father, kind of both dichotomy and unity. And this is a beautiful painting by Botticelli. Not his best painting, but yeah, I like Botticelli. It kind of fits into what I'm talking about. So you have the Father there, you have the Son, and you have the Holy Spirit. Both create the world, and also he have this kind of blueprint of reality. And he offers guidance to us human beings about how to live our life. Religious tradition tells you about all kinds of things, or at least some of them. They tell you how to dress, right? What to eat, when to eat, when to rest, when to work. What should you be doing with your money, right? Who you can have sex with. You know, if you have monogamy, I mean, it's not universal, but you know, if you're married, you cannot, and this and that. So some of these religious injunctions about how to live your life are kind of very specific. You know, this kind of dress, eating, and habits, and so on. Some of them are general: be kind, be generous, treat strangers with hospitality, and so on. So general guidelines. And again, so if you want to, I mean. There is a religious aspect, and people who are religious maybe find meaning and comfort and so on, but also going back to this kind of sociological understanding of religion, is this kind of, you have to have common sets of values that facilitate order. For society to function, we have to be on the same page. I mean, this is one way to think about the origins and the need and the function of religion. What happens if you think lying and cheating and so on? I mean, in our system, we deal this with laws and regulations and police and courts and so on. But I mean, actually, psychologists have done this with kids. Like, if you do something that you're not supposed to do, what's the likelihood if you are alone versus somebody's watching you? Well, if somebody's watching you properly, they do this with kids with marshmallows, like, okay, don't do it. So the kids, when they're cheap, if they know somebody's watching, they're not going to do the wrong thing, like get the marshmallow or something like that. But So this is one way to think in terms of commerce, like you have to have a trust among people kind of exchanging goods and so on, the creation of economy. So if people think there's somebody watching all the time, am I going to cheat on my taxes? Well, people feel that believers, they still do cheat and so on, but you pause, right? And also if you know that the other person believes in divine punishment because God can be kind, but if you piss him off, oh my Lord, at least according to, I mean, he can brimstone and fires and pestilence and burn you out. I mean, just you don't mess with him, right? So there is that element there. I mean, this is just one example, but this kind of how this function on that level. And it's basically, we all have our egoistical impulses, I want. But some systems of belief or ideologies have this notion that we have innate sense of morality. I'm not sure about that. We have these egoistical impulses, and this is kind of put a brake on that. She said, "This is you shouldn't be doing. You shouldn't be killing, stealing, cheating, and so on." It works up to a point, of course. We know the history of humanity. Many people who call themselves religious or believe genuinely to be religious do horrible things, but at least makes you pause, gives you a different moral framework, and also kind of ideally, if it works well, fosters a sense of community, shared community, right? And this goes back again to this notion of religion as a social construct. So in that sense, this is another sociologist of religion. Peter Berger is going along the lines of this kind of notion of sacred canopy. So we have all this, I mean, society is very complicated. You have different elements, the kind of interacting and human beings, but also other impersonal forces and so on. But religion kind of superimposes this kind of system of meaning and systems of values, which can foster social harmony or smooth function. Of course, they also impose strictures, going back to the story of the mother that I mentioned, the second vignette. So it can be oppressive in some degree, but at the same time, if you don't have certain breaks on individual impulses and behaviors, and if you don't have common frames of reference, common sense of morality, it's difficult to have a good society, as we're increasingly realizing in this great country. The problem, there are many problems, potential problems. There are many wonderful things about this notion of religion is that who does the interpretation of divine will? What's the blueprint? We have scriptures, and there are some people who believe of literal interpretation of scriptures. I'm sorry to tell you, there's no such thing of literal interpretation. To say I'm doing literal interpretation is a choice you make about certain mode of interpretation. And of course, also the scriptures are so complicated. I mean, the Christian scripture, the Jewish scripture, the Buddhist scriptures, oh my Lord, these people like to write. It's so voluminous, many times. You can find all sorts of things. But also who interprets all of this. So this is the problem, because God really doesn't speak. I'm not sure if there is God or not. I mean, I can have my personal beliefs. I mean, there are people who think that God speaks with them. He usually tells them what they want to hear, right? But really, for the most part, God is silent. The monotheistic tradition recognizes that you have the prophet, right? The prophecy is the prophet that speaks for God, because God is silent, God recedes in the background. So there are all kinds of people who interpret religion. So this is a quote from Rumi, the great Sufi mystics. So love is the bridge between you and everything. What do you think about this? Sounds good. Sounds good. And actually, I'm going to show you full quote. So you can have Rumi. He's a great saint. I don't know if you have been to Konya. This is where he was active, and this is his tomb is there. It's absolutely wonderful place. I mean, my wife, like, this was her type, and we travel a lot. We were there just because it was the last trip in Europe before the pandemic, actually. it's wonderful. So you have these stories about his life and so on, and also the dances they do, all this kind of wonderful. But then you have Ayatollah Khomeini is also claimed to speak for Islam, and he's also, you know, leader of Shia Muslims or whatever, and his message is not about love. Let's put it that way. It's about politics, it's about power, and from what we know, he was not a particularly nice person. I mean, I've never met him, but that's what people tend to say about him. So, who interprets? Do you have the pedophile priest in the church in somewhere in the rural France? You know, there were just hundreds of thousands. Or you have the Saint Francis speaking to the birds in Tuscany in medieval in Renaissance Europe before the Renaissance, and kind of conveying the message of God. You have Rumi, you have Khomeini. Now, if you want some more quotation from Rumi, please enjoy for 30 seconds as I have a sip of water. And you can make this, of course, also for I mean, Christianity, for Judaism, for Buddhism, and so on. There are various persons who claim to speak for their religion, right? Then there are the critiques of religion, right? Give me a break, God. Guys, bearded guy in the sky, sending brimstone. Come on, it's 21st century. Who believes in this kind of stuff, right? And I mean, also you look at these biblical stories. I mean, yes, some of it is about love, but some of it is downright nasty. I mean, we read our sacred book selectively. Buddhist scripture, all these fanciful heavenly realms with all these deities flying through the sky. Who made? I mean, it's kind of creative if you think in those terms. So these are kind of maybe. If you understand the religious text literally, rather than symbolically and with sophistication, this is possible. Like this stuff, if you're a non-believer, kind of much of it is kind of a little bit weird, right? Also, if you want to criticize religion, I mean, God knows, it's very easy to find good examples, contemporary, historical. I mean, you have massacres, you have crusades, you have killings of heretics, you have the Inquisition, you have now, like with Burma, the Buddhist, supposedly peaceful religion, the kind of peace and so on. So today there's kind of inspired, and usually kind of this violence is complicated, of course, but then of course the suicide bomber is a classical example of that, right? But also religious traditions also sanction. I mean, usually, even in our country, I mean, we have kind of want to think of ourselves as being a secular capitalist religion versus church separation. But if we go to war, usually we haven't been. But you know, before we went to Iran or something like that, there were religious leaders who, yeah, they were very, very happy we go to war. At least, you know, divine. I mean, sanction from a religious perspective. You know, this is just war theory and so on. Go. And then, of course, it turned out it's all wrong. Pretexts and nothing to do with religion and so on. So yeah, you can find now in contemporary, you have the Taliban now running kind of Afghanistan and so on. So they're not very nice, right? And also this kind of notion that religion is something impedes social progress, uses women patriarchy, it's against science. This kind of nonsense about anti-evolution theory and whatnot. Like, why on earth religious people have to pick up this fight with scientists to be perceived to be? I mean, of course, again, not all religious people are like that, but this kind of notion that, and this ties up into this kind of utopian vision, secular vision of this wonderful society when it cleans it of religion, we all rational and then we all just have iPhones and just plugged in, and you know, you have access to G5 networks and maybe even some brain kind of microchips in their brain, and voila, everything will be wonderful. We will all be morons just doing TikTok videos and kind of, I mean, what kind of vision is that? And we buy this vision now. Facebook is doing this vision of metaverse and something like that. I mean, it's like, my Lord, we don't know our own world, including ourselves. We are going to create some kind of imaginary, but this is again another way of thinking. So religion can be seen, at least traditional, as impeding it. And of course, we have the main critics. This was kind of more recently over the last couple of decades, the so-called atheists, right? So basically, religious beliefs irrational, and kind of you can find many examples from scriptural texts of pronouncement that kind of sounds irrational. I mean, right? I mean, you read the book of Revelation. I mean, again, if you're outside of the system of belief or this kind of visions of apocalypse or killing of heretics, like, my Lord, what is this? I mean, it's kind of easy. I mean, again, religious people might have their point about that, but also this is big, this kind of empirical evidence. This is kind of the primary of science, right? Religion until 19th century was still the dominant way of thinking and kind of try to control knowledge for sometimes not for the best. And then you have the advance of the scientific paradigm, and now this promise that science will answer all these questions. Religion was promising before that they will tell you all about what you need to know about reality, about creation, and then science is claiming, well, we still need a little bit more money from your paychecks to kind of more sophisticated. Give us a few $1 billion here and there, but we are getting there. We will unlock all the mysteries. We'll look at fireware galaxy, shoot spaceship, and we will tell you what it's all about, right? This kind of promise. So, but this kind of empirical evidence. So, what's the empirical evidence for the existence of God, or supernatural reality, miracles, and so on? And the short answer is none. It's a matter of faith, and that's why religion is different from science. It's not about empirical evidence. It's about faith. It's about openness to different ways of perceiving reality, of experiencing different modes of reality, realms of reality, and so on. But this is kind of lost. And then also the negative aspect of religion. Again, you can see, I mean, it's undeniable there is lots of that. I mean, contemporary, historical, I mean, you have genital mutilation in some Islamic societies and abuse of women all over the place and so on. But that's not the whole story. What the world will be if you didn't have the music of Johann Sebastian Bach. Wouldn't that be much, much more impoverished if you didn't have the paintings of Fra Angelico or Botticelli? The Botticelli had a secular twist, or Michelangelo statues, or the beautiful architecture of the churches and the cathedrals, so the beautiful sculptures of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas created by wonderful artists in Kamakura, Japan. Well, yes, it can be injurious, but it's kind of a little bit more complicated than that, right? So religion is kind of creating this kind of utopia of afterlife based on irrational suppositions, based on empirical evidence, but we, rational beings, create our own utopia. So one utopia, this is not utopia, one of the driving principles that this goes back in European intellectual tradition, this kind of secularization paradigm, that as society develops, there's advancement of scientific knowledge, more reliance of empirical evidence, as Nietzsche proclaimed, God is dead, so we move to those kind of primitive, kind of religiously inflected, illusory beliefs, as Freud will put it, that society becomes increasingly secularized, right? And then eventually religion recedes in the background and eventually disappears. I don't know how long you have been. I mean, actually, we don't have, usually for these kind of events, both the speaker and the audience are not the youngest generation. So we have been around. But if you look at the world, in my country, like when I grew up, in terms of what role religion played in my life, zero. I was not born in this country, as you can see from my accent. My family, I never went to church. There was no discussion. There was nothing particularly strong anti-religious brainwashing American language. It was completely secular. If I go now, I mean, I don't go very often, but my sister is. Well, she's not doing some kind of more high-level administrative stuff, but she was doing religious paintings. She's restoring medieval religious arts and icons. My mother is kind of, she's a sociologist, So she kind of had been dealing with issues of sociology, but this was not in the picture when I was there. Look at Russia now; it's in the news, right? How much religion was part of Soviet life 30 years ago? Not much now. It's you know, Putin is the great defender of faith and so on. If you look at Islamic societies, we are fighting these Islamic insurgents. Actually, many of these, like Saddam regime and so, were very, very secular. The Egyptian regime also. I mean, all these North African regime, that there were strong figures. So kind of obviously, with empirical evidence, this is a bit of a nonsense. The religion is not disappearing. Maybe it's disappearing in Northern Europe, in Scandinavian countries or something like that. But that's not really representative of all of humanity. Again, you can see in our country sometimes maybe people like go less to church and so on, but still, you look around you, look at your media, even like Hollywood movies and so on, it's all over the place. And then there are these secular utopias, Marxist utopia, right? This perfect communist society when we kind of deal with the capitalists, the workers rise and they replace the civil capitalists, and then eventually we create this kind of wonderful society where everything will be groovy. But this is kind of some kind of weird secularized version of paradise, right? Except that it's based on a complete misunderstanding of human nature. So the workers will kill the oppressors, and what the workers are enlightened? Really? Or they kind of, one of them, like Stalin or or Mao, some tyrant will raise there and kind of kill millions of people, right? And so you have this kind of Maoism. I mean, I'm doing Chinese studies, just depressing. I mean, 30+ million people, some of them killed, but many starvation during the late 50s, 60s. I mean, that's Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, plus sun. Everybody dies. Can you imagine that? And even worse, like his picture is still at the main square in China. There, and he's on the currency and kind of how much evil is there? I mean, how can you get more evil than that? And of course, the oppression. It's not just this. We are talking about death, but of course, many people didn't die, but children made to abuse their parents, and families broken, and uneducated populace. It's just horror. So you get all this kind of, and science, of course, also creates this kind of utopia. I alluded to this kind of, that science will solve all these problems, we'll figure out everything by following the scientific method and so on. So at the point here, when we think about all these kind of promises, whether religious or secular promises of a perfect society, kind of, let's look at us. Human beings are complicated creature. By the way, I hope I'm not. I will go a little bit more, but yeah, I will kind of finish before too long. So basically, we are kind of divided. On one level, we are social creature. We have this need to interact with others, to create a sense of community. We have this tribal identity, right? I mean, you can see, like I'm coming from Gainesville, we have this weird Gator tribe. And then once in a while, you're one of them, yeah. But you must belong to some other tribes also, right? So with all these kind of needs, and now we have this weird, like I'm going to show you some pictures, like QAnon tribe, right? People believe in this kind of, or we have Republican tribe and Democratic tribe, but then we have progressive Democratic tribe, and then of course we have real tribes, like I don't know, tribes in terms of how this is a particular group of people, tribal society, ethnicity, we have racial groups, and we divide ourselves in gender because we need to have this kind of sense of community and identity, create identity based. And sometimes we have multiple identities, sometimes they're difficult to, of course, we have Christian tribes, but not one Christian tribe. We have Catholic, which is the biggest, and then we have Lutheran and Baptist and Methodist and Presbyterian and so on. And then you have Jewish tribe, but that's also, you have some people who think, I agree with this new atheist that this God stuff is complete nonsense. And then many who believe God is real, but you know, Orthodox and liberal Jews and so on. So we have this kind of need to establish, because ultimately we are we are social creatures, and at the same time, we're egoistical creatures. All of us have this kind of strong sense of self, which maybe some both philosophical and religious system is based on the illusion of basic misapprehension of our true nature and of reality. And we have narcissistic tendencies, all of us. Some of us can control it, they're not too crazy. Some are off the charts, unaware, absolutely lucky, and sometimes some people who are quite narcissistic kind of seems to be able to rise to the top and create all kinds of problems for everybody, whether they're aware or not. So we have this kind of egoistical impulses, narcissistic, that just fits me, and we kind of basically look at reality, construct reality on the basis of us at the center. But how many people believe outside of myself, if I think I'm the center, which actually I don't, but if I'm an unreflective person and I process reality through me, through the lenses of me, my needs, my desires, my expectations, and so on, how many people agree with that? I don't know anybody, including my wife. I mean, sometimes she tells me I'm wonderful, this and that. Sometimes I'm not wonderful, I'm horrible, and she doesn't like me. My mother, some people will say my mother, but actually not really. When push comes to shove, if my mother had to choose between herself and me, I know it's not going to be me. No. I hope your mother is better. My mother is not a nice lady, but basically, so we have this kind of boundaries we create. There is the self, which we don't understand. We don't know who we are. We don't understand our consciousness, and so we have this kind of sense of self and the world. So it's a balancing how to balance. I mean, if you have too much emphasis on communal ties and social obligation and tribal identity, that can become oppressive, right? You have to do this and this and this, and if you don't fit in, wow, you're a terrible person, you know. Whether, for example, if you happen to be gay, your daughter or something is lesbian, and then you live in a society where that's absolutely not acceptable. Then what do you do with that? But at the same time, and in our society, we go the other way. It's what sociologists of religion, such as Keller, call utilitarian individualism, that everything is about my needs, about my concerns, including the way our political participation, economic decisions, all me. And it's impossible to have a good functioning society if we just have a bunch of egomaniacs who just look for themselves. It just doesn't work that way. So really, it's a balancing act. And what's the religion here? What's the role that religion can do to make this more smooth, that people can express their creativity, they can participate, can create wholesome communities, interact with each other in a wholesome way, can be compassionate and so on. I'm kind of running out of time, so I'm not going to. Basically, the point here trying to make is that the problem, the way I see it, is both humanism and nationalism, is that we have wrong supposition about human nature, that we are rational beings. Are we? Look at our economic behavior. This is rational. Just the kind of consumer theory. Really? Are we rational? You see how the stock market is going up and down? Is that real value, or is it just people rational? These people have PhDs in math and so on. It's kind of, I don't know what your portfolios are going, but mine have been going pretty wild recently because of this war. So, and this is kind of, maybe it's based, maybe we should look and try to understand more, like what drives this kind of lady to kind of proclaim this truth of God knows who is writing those kind of prophecies or whatever is doing. So I would suggest here that really we need religion in some form, but what kind of religion? And we can say, well, okay, let's have a good religion. Because we established religion can be positive force. We have Bach, we have great saints, we have Saint Francis, we have the Buddha, we have giant saints, we have great poets. Okay, we can Rumi maybe, wonderful, kind of brotherhood, unity, even criticize, you should kind of deconstruct religion itself. But who decides, right? who decides what's good and bad? So this is always a problem. We can never we can muddle through. So sometimes we believe certain prophets, but there are many wrong prophets. I mean, I can kind of have a whole series of lecture about false prophets. I mean, the kind of outlandish stuff that some people believe in is quite amazing. So kind of I would like to suggest, this is just, I'm throwing it here, some kind of, so what are, instead of just following individuals telling us what is good and bad, what are some of the basic criteria we can kind of assess both individuals, like what's good religion or bad, or what we want to engage with and participate with, what we want to avoid, but also as a society, maybe think. This is not a prescription, I'm just throwing some things. But perhaps a religion should go beyond absolutes. And I think scientific should also. This kind of notion that I have the key to the truth. I know the truth, and who are you? And how do you know the truth? Just because your scripture said, I mean, there are other scriptures, God, but you don't communicate with God. I mean, maybe you have some fantasies in your brain, echo chamber that you communicate, but God by definition is beyond, we're talking about Christian or Jewish kind of definition of monotheistic God is beyond our kin, beyond our capacity to understand, to comprehend. He's glorious. I mean, he's transcendental. We are just limited creatures, right? So kind of you have to go beyond this absolute, this is the truth and nothing but it. And this type of exclusivism, my part. So why it's your religion just because it's your religion? It's kind of a little bit narcissistic, egoistical and one-sided, right? And also not very good, because then you have fight, because some people don't agree, and then you have force and disagreement. Also, religion have to open to this kind of go beyond the opposite of absolute, just embrace doubt and uncertainty. We look at the great mistakes. Maybe let's look at the glory of God and the perfection and wisdom, or when Buddha thinks about, you know, this undifferentiated nature of reality in which all phenomena in the universe interpenetrate in this complex causal relationship. There is this kind of wow. Or when you go in the morning on the beach on siesta key and just look at the glorious sunset or sunrise, sorry. Sunset is on the other side, but I usually go and stay on the street. Yes, I did it yesterday. Actually, I have some beautiful pictures. Like I actually posted it on Facebook, as you mentioned. But this is kind of uncertainty. What is this coming from, right? And also sense of humility. I don't know. But I don't know, this kind of sense of humility means I want to learn, I want to engage. I'm open to this mystery. And actually, most of the beautiful things are things, what is it when I listen to Bach cantata? Requiem, what is it? How do I respond to that? I don't know, but it does something to me. I mean, in terms of this, especially religious music, or Miserere Mei, I mean, it's a beautiful piece. You know, this is composed by it's for the Sistine Chapel. I mean, absolutely stunning. So it's kind of not all things can be empirically established. Actually, most of the most beautiful things are about this kind of openness, and not knowing humility also implies openness, right? Openness of heart, openness of mind, willingness to engage in rather lack of dogmatism. This is again big no. For me, I have been studying Buddhism since I was a teenager, in part because in this tradition there is much more critique of dogmatic assertion, dogmatic teachings. Not to say that there are not Buddhists who still make dogmas out of Buddhist teachings, that you should have not a dogma, it becomes a dogma. I mean, human beings are complicated. But and ultimately practical consideration, this goes back to the theory of pragmatism. It's a philosophical theory, and here actually Americans finally kind of entered, kind of wrote, or at least the philosophical scene and make major contributions. So you should not judge the theory, not beliefs and the institutions and so on, and not that important. But what is important is really the impact. Is religious belief and practice and going to church make people into better persons, who are open, who are kind, who are compassionate, open to the needs of others, or is it a bunch of nasty, intolerant, narrow-minded people? So this is another way to judge. And finally, very, very briefly, a religion as part of spiritual cultivation. And this comes with the notion that we human beings are imperfect, that really there's lots of room for improvement. And also this kind of notion that the reality perceived is misapprehension of reality. There's larger vision of reality of the world, and maybe religion can provide some kind of key. So this is kind of tapping in this kind of potential for self-betterment. There are many paths, and this is again important. There's not a singular path, because all religious traditions, including all practices, all texts, all rituals, are provisional constructs. They are there to fulfill certain human needs. If you use them wisely, they can be perhaps helpful. If you use them wrongly, they become part of the problem. No matter how beautiful religious passage or scriptural passage or vision is, if you become form of attachment, if you become form of dogmatic clinging, if you become form of pretext for excluding others, it's a problem. Religion becomes the problem. But if you don't do that, if you use it in a different way, and so kind of I should be wrapping this up. I'm almost there. And so basically here, this kind of search for self-transcendence, whether it's Christian mystics or Buddhist meditators and so on. So you have to have some kind of teaching techniques, guidance about meditation, spiritual cultivation, also templates of meaning, which are provisional, like in reality or God or nirvana cannot be explained to words and concepts, but some kind of philosophical system that explain, kind of give you some kind of idea, orient you. And then it's about this breaking down boundaries between the self and the world. And of course, that involves also re-examination of the self and maybe a different vision of the universe. So when the self is empty, when all false attachments, suppositions, including religious ones, disappear, well, what do we see? Well, it's not for me to say, but we see what there is to see, and then we participate with what there is to see, and maybe that's what is called reality. Now, cultivation, and I have been giving examples, so let me kind of, it's not a free game, like, so everybody should maybe become a Buddhist focus on self-cultivation, so everybody should just, just do Buddhist meditation, or I don't know, some yoga or stuff, and then everything will be groovy. Well, unfortunately, we as human beings are a little bit more screwed up than that. Because our capacity for self-deception is limitless. So basically, spiritual practices, and this is something that this is a problem. I mean, I told you what the problem with Christianity, with Buddhism, is that we have egos engage with spiritual practices instead of dissolving the ego and orient themselves toward larger reality. Religious cultivation becomes a form of expressing, enhancing the ego, becoming more narcissistic, more self-absorbed. I mean, it doesn't always work that way, but it's a real danger, and there are many examples. So there are all kinds of gurus. This is like this charlatan, really, I mean, but very important Tibetan guru with lots of disciples. The same story is always about sex. A Japanese roti. I don't know how he can do sex at that age, but maybe he's better than me, whatever. Take that out, actually. But anyway, and also there is the constant danger, like all this tradition, that really our consumer society captivates religious tradition and spirituality and commodifies them and becomes expressions of consumerist behavior rather than something that criticizes the world. Because the basic, the basic supposition of religion is the world in which we live is imperfect and that we need to do something about it. So which one is it, ladies and gentlemen? Kind of, this is kind of, I'm coming to the end. I can apologize for going too long. Divine revelation, superstition, path to self-cultivation. What do you think? I'm not sure. Well, depends. It's complicated. I guess both, right? Or none, right? Okay, that's all. Again, thank you for listening. I really appreciate it. I think I went a little bit longer than anticipated, but I hope it was not too much suffering to listen to me. But we still have some time for questions and answers.
Yeah, feel free to raise your hand and Mario can call in directly. So,
please.
So the secular tribes seem to be becoming more and more important and larger. The belief systems that drive people to do things versus the non-secular tribal traditional religions. And it seems that, and let me ask the is it your opinion that we are falling away from that traditional religious belief and turning into these secular tribes that call it religion, call it whatever you want? Our belief system is based on real self-interest and real ego. It seems in the United States that seems to be what's happening. You talk about being, diverse. We talk about being diverse and hard to talk to each other.
Yeah, there are two ways to answer with this. First of all, this kind of secular versus religious tribe. I mean, often in our society, actually, these secular tribes, like if you look at QAnon, for example, this kind of conspiracy, but there are millions of people kind of really participate. So but they create a sense of community, but there is a very important religious component. I think some of the slides, the pictures, this is the major. Just the pictures are so good, and there are so many of them because in the media I couldn't resist. But that was not the main point of my lecture. But actually, often this kind of secularized, kind of politically oriented beliefs, or not just beliefs, but these are practical forces of action. They want to bring some certain change, also expressed in religious language and use religious symbolism. So if you look, for example, at evangelical Christians, there are lots of wonderful research. It's not my area, but how they're basically co-opted and how they come to. I mean, there was before Trump quite a bit of that, but it became especially kind of worrisome for many who are not Trumpian. So you have this kind of relationship between political ideology and religious belief is interesting, and what are the dynamics. But often is believed, like you have lots of religious people who seem to be expressing their views in political ways. But actually, people have done research. It's not so much that really religious people are called to participate in the political process and take certain very aggressive stances and try to enact policies, but it's people who have certain political agendas, adopt the identity and the language and the symbolism of religion to foster those kind of things. So this is one way to think about this. And it's kind of complicated, but the other element is, if you look at many of these secular ideologies, I will use Maoism. I don't know how much you have studied modern Chinese history, but if you look, you can also Russian communism to some degree. I mean, really, it operates for all practical purposes as a religion. I mean, Durkheim's idea of religion fits perfectly. So you have Mao becomes deified, he becomes the deity. I mean, people literally bow to Mao. You have a marriage before you had maybe some Taoist god or something like that. You have statue of Mao and you do traditional bows. You go, you have the holy book, the profound quotations of Chia. Now we have actually, this is even more deranged. Now you have the holy book of Xi Jinping, this new dictator we have in China, right? I hope this, definitely this is going to be banned in China if it circulates on the internet. But so this is kind of, and then you have rituals, right? I mean, you have the rituals of communist officials and so on, also kind of congregations and so on. So really, on some level, if you also look at Russian communism, I mean, they were very anti-religious, but there's the cult of Lenin, of Stalin, of Marx. Of course, Marx becomes also deified. So there is kind of, also, just one example, if you go to Paris, actually, you have this monument of French secularism, all these wonderful writers and so on. It's the Pantheon, right? You go there, the tombs of all these great Frenchmen. So this is kind of monument of secularism. I mean, the French kind of kick out religion, have this very aggressively intolerant secular society. Look at the architecture. It's just a church. It's kind of, so they basically use the symbolism. I mean, I was stunned some years back. I've been in Paris after that, but when I first went, it's amazing. So it's very difficult to speak. So anyway, please.
Well, my thought was that a lot of people who point to our current lack of civility and so forth is because we have fallen away as a culture from religion, which I very much object to, because I mean, secular Jew and
Yeah.
secular humanism, secular Judaism, they all have mores and culture of very good things, you know, typically not the narcissistic sort of brand of behavior, you know, as a society, you know, so I just think that.
Yeah, you can make that argument, of course, because, I mean, there was this kind of, how can you have morality without believing in God?
Right.
Kind of empirically speaking, it's nonsense. I mean, Buddhists don't believe in God. And of course, many of them are immoral, including the government in Myanmar and the political and economic elites of Thailand, but many are moral. And actually, if you look at the scriptures and the text, they foster a sense of morality. And then if you look at some people who are secular, many of them are immoral, but some of them can be moral. So it's kind of this kind of issue. So that's not a good argument, especially for belief in existence of God. Having said that, if you look through human history in the aggregate, it's for most people, a religious faith can foster a sense of morality if done properly. So you look at in the large sweep of human history, and that's the problem. Some of these new atheists, for example, Richard Dawkins, kind of he's writing about this kind of stupid religion and irrational. It's about going against empirical evidence, and especially about this clash against evolutionary theory, because he is evolutionary biologist. And so people should just not believe in this and that. It's kind of stupid. I mean, I'm sorry, Richard, but most people don't have PhDs from prestigious universities, not professors at Oxford. And also, I'm sure, I don't know him personally, but also you have it, and you also seems a little bit screwed up to me. And there are lots of people who you think so, who know you well. So we need traditions, we need systems of tradition that kind of orient, because most people cannot, I mean, look at this, look at our elections. I mean, like how much evidence do you have to see for corruption, for stupidity, for insanity? You're not talking about one, two, and it's not like people who vote the other way, they're all saints and enlightened. I mean, there are crazies on all sides, more on maybe on certain sides than others, so that's the thing. Like when you think about sociology, like individually, of course, individuals can be moral, and you can find many examples. And this is a valid argument of humanists and atheists and so on. But on the whole, I think it will be very pity to give these rich traditions of moral teachings and stories that orient human lives, and especially this seems to work for many people and have been working for the centuries. But of course, to impose that, and God forbid to have corrupt church institutions also kind of enriching themselves by kind of claiming to be spokesperson for personal gateways to liberation. That's of course also problematic. But that's a good point. Thank you. Yes, please.
When you were speaking, what popped up in my mind was this triangle and an upside down triangle, a path going to love or a path going to fear, and the underneath part power. And I was thinking for myself, applying what you said, it's again my own relationship to my own sense of power. And do I want to go and learn, like with Rumi, the experience of love and expanding that? Or do I gravitate to religious activity out of a sense of fear and power and wanting it managed? And I was just thinking, is that something that's talked about? Or?
Yeah, I mean, both love and fear are very powerful emotions, and they motivate human behavior. Now, there is room for fear. I mean, if fear, like whether it's fear of karma, divine punishment, helps you not to kill somebody. But if fear is just fostering a sense of fear among population for political power and so on, so it's kind of basically everything is a little bit more nuanced and so on. But the choice is there, but also the ability. Like often the problem we have psychologically speaking is that, I mean, you can think like, okay, I have these choices, but when push comes to shove, you know, when your life comes to crossroad, which one do you respond to, and how equipped you are to take the path of love rather than the path of fear? Or how much you're malleable to be indoctrinated, to be manipulated by false prophets, by political ideologues, by all kinds of gangsters who profit from human ignorance and stupidity. And that's kind of, and it's something, it's our own personal responsibility on some level, but it's also how we can create a society where, you know, whether we educators or parents and so on, we can, and it's tough. Human beings, I mean, this is one thing I don't agree with humanists. We are much more screwed up. I mean, this kind of notion that, you know, we are, or, you know, yeah, Bach, wonderful, Michelangelo, wonderful, Van Gogh, my God, he was genius, except he only sold one painting for 3 times because people were morons. They couldn't recognize that he was a genius. Bach also, I mean, he was not that famous and he kind of was forgotten, and they discovered it. So kind of our capacity, and that's why I think tradition is important. I'm personally not a traditionalist, but so I'm talking in terms of what I think is good for society as a whole. I mean, I never fitted into my society and so on. So my personal, I'm kind of maybe much more individualistic, even though I'm criticizing individual, but looking in aggregate, yeah. Please.
One of the issues I keep seeing in religion is the role of shame. That you are just not good enough as to who you are, even when you're born. Because people said, wow, you know, your religion says if I'm good, I get all the quick rewards.
Yeah.
If I'm bad, I get. But I have a 1-month-old child, and the child dies of fever.
Yeah.
Why? He or she didn't do anything wrong.
Yeah.
They didn't sin. But this role of feeling of we're just not adequate. And also that we can't communicate personally with God. We need an institution to punch our ticket. Right? The Egyptians said, you have to buy this book. Your soul is going to be weighed on the scale of the end of giving all the answers to the SATs. You know,
You basically have a gatekeeper, and you have to pass a particular gate, and then if you don't, or if you don't fulfill certain requirements, you're shamed. Yeah, that's an aspect of religion like that, which is kind of unfortunate. Yes, I agree. When you first said you're not good enough, I said, oh, finally some criticism. Yeah, I thought, oh, he's telling me. Yes.
Thanks so much for your talk today. It's been really helpful to me because I like to think about these things. I am a Jewish Buddhist atheist. And so, you know, for me, you know, and if I were to say what my religion is science. You know, so what is the future for the idea perhaps of science as the religion of the future? And we talk about what society needs as religion, but there are so many different societies. The society in Afghanistan, society in Africa, society in, you know, South America, the society in the United States. They're very different societies.
I don't know. I mean, you find lots of the clergy, maybe some of them really want to put your destiny in scientists. They created the atom bomb and the hydrogen bomb. And do you know what kind of experiments Japanese scientists did during the Second World War?
The science is the information that was learned. The application is human.
But human decisions? Who decides how it's applied? Who makes those kind of decisions on the ground of criteria? I don't know about you. I mean, it depends what you mean by science and so on. I think if you look at the history of civilization, and we have this kind of, basically we are beholden by religious institution. And I mean, I'm not like here dismissing of religious beliefs and so on, but basically much of religion, basically we kind of had to follow religious superstition, if I can use the term loosely. And this was kind of the paradigm we all have to follow. And this was how truth was given and so on. And you had to abide, and then that kind of paradigm was changed. I mean, even though still people believe in religion, and it's an important part of their life, but this kind of belief in science. So religion was supposed to give all the answers, but kind of, okay, God died, and maybe so now science will provide these answers. I'm not sure, because again, we deal with this kind of realm of absolutes, and I think good science also is a science that recognizes its limitations. Even basic things, I mean, the nature of consciousness. I mean, when you look at some of this neuroscientific research, I'm sorry to say, but this is such a dilettantish stuff. Like some lights, I mean, of course, some parts of the brain kind of light up and so on. What does that tell? I mean, it tells you something, but do you really uncover the mystery? So, I mean, it's fine. Like if the choice is between good science and bad religion, sure, go for it. It's just who can guarantee good science. And then when you look at the role of technology, especially, because when you think about science, actually most of you think about technology, and technology is large corporations with their interests. I mean, would you like somebody like Mark Zuckerberg, or the guys at Google, or the guy at Apple, to really tell you what to think? They're not going to tell you directly. They're not dogmatic. They're not religious. They're going to create algorithms that will brainwash you what to think, what to buy, how to and so on. I mean, I think it's basically what I'm saying is science is important, and there's a role of science. I personally like science, and I'm interested in technology and try to follow, but also to be humble about the limitation. We live in a vast universe that is infinitely complex. There are so many nodes of information. This kind of notion that you can all figure it out, and also figure it out on the basis of physical objects, basically, and physical forces, whether on subatomic particles and so on. What does it tell you about the human mind, about sense of values, about enjoying a poem, creating beautiful music? And I would argue these are the things that make human life worth living, not being glued to computer or something like that. So, I mean, I agree, science is a good paradigm, and there is a lot of that. So I'm not arguing against science, but maybe I'm arguing against scientism. That basically science establishment becomes arbiter of good and kind of uses basically asserts monopoly of knowledge and power to arbitrate knowledge, which is what the church was claiming for itself. So you have one kind of institutional hierarchy with its own agenda. So that's, but it's a good point, and I can sympathize. And actually, I'm teaching a course in the fall on, in part, on Jewish, Buddhist, agnostics. This is a new course on development. I will be teaching in the fall to our students. Do we have more time for one more question, or are we out? So, final question.
Could you talk a little bit about the symposium?
Yes. May I, or do? Yeah. So the idea, the symposium is going to start tomorrow at 9 o'clock. It's a gathering of scholars. You have the names there, and the idea was this will be kind of a little bit more academic, and probably, I don't know. Did you find this interesting, what I was saying? Was it, again, okay, it's probably a little bit more boring, actually, probably quite a bit of more boring, because it's academics talking other, but at the same time, we have wonderful scholars who are exploring issues. Basically, it will be, in terms of geography, it will be mostly on China, and we are going to, mostly pre-modern, but we are going to look at and ritual, but also we are going to look at the connection between these categories, how contemplative practices kind of can be understood in terms of ritual and vice versa. So if you're interested on Buddhism, on Taoism, on Chinese religion, on contemplative practices, on ritual theory and so on, I think, and also just to meet the people, and this is a beautiful place. Just come again, go to the library, enjoy it, wonderful art. So I